I am a criminal defense attorney. I actually am the founder and owner of a law firm called the Attorneys for Freedom Law Firm. You can find us on the internet. Just put Attorneys for Freedom into any search engine, will come right up. But if you go to attorneysforfreedom.com, you'll find our law firm website. And our law firm we have one firm in Arizona and another location in Honolulu, Hawaii. And we do cases nationally all throughout the United States. And I've been practicing about 28 years. We do major felony cases, those kinds of things. I'm also about a 35-year libertarian. Very proud to say I'm a libertarian. I'm a strong believer in what you might call the non-aggression principle and those types of things. And also I'm a former United States Marine. You can maybe see some pictures there in the back in my office, and I'm proud of my service there as well. And I'm also the founder of a brand new global peace movement called the Live and Let Live movement. And people can find out about that by just going to liveandletlive.org.
All right, thank you. That sounds good. So do you consider yourself like an anarcho-capitalist or just a libertarian?
Well, it's a good question. My opinion is that there is no difference between a libertarian and somebody who calls themselves an anarcho-capitalist. These mean the same things. There are many other labels that people who maybe fall under the general category of what I like to call pro-freedom might call themselves. Voluntarist is a name I'm very comfortable with as well. But because the term anarchist is not very well defined, right? People misunderstand what people are talking about when you say I'm an anarchist or an anarcho-capitalist. I don't use that type of a label anymore. I just simply describe myself as maybe a live and let live kind of guy.
I see. Okay. So I don't know if what do you think the role of the state should be, like when you define yourself as that?
I think I'm a believer in a certain principle that the libertarians call the non-aggression principle. John Stuart Mill called the harm principle. And we live and let livers call the live and let live principle. And just so we all know what we're talking about here, the way we define this principle is basically don't be an aggressor. That's sort of the overarching concept. Don't be an aggressor. It should be illegal to be an aggressor. Said another way, if somebody is aggressing, we're justified in using whatever force is necessary to stop somebody from aggressing. So this begs the question, what does it mean to aggress? Okay, so we can break that down and say, well, aggressing is somebody who initiates force against another person or their property, somebody who engages in fraud, somebody who engages in coercion. And then the final category of being an aggressor is somebody who does something that we lawyers might say that creates a substantial risk of harm to another person or their property. So to say that slightly different, don't do things that put other people or their property at grave risks of harm. So if you do that, well, then you're violating the principle. If you don't do that, well, then we in the Live and Let Live movement and also the libertarians say that you should be acting legally. Doesn't mean that you're acting morally or that we agree with what you're doing. I may try to talk you out of doing something that doesn't violate the principle. But at the end of the day, if you're a competent adult, then you're in charge of your body, your property, your money, and your time. So let me say it like this. I think this rule should apply to every single person on the entire planet. I think it should still apply to them, even if they form groups, even small groups. If me and you form a group, we don't get to violate that rule. I think it should apply to big groups like organizations or corporations. I don't think corporations should get to violate that rule. And I think it should also apply to the biggest group of all, which is governments. So I don't care what somebody feels about government, as long as they agree that the government shouldn't, like everybody else, get to violate that role, then I don't care how you define government or the state, whether you like it big or small or whatever you want it to do, I don't care, so long as they don't violate the rule. So we answer in the Live and Let Live movement this kind of question very simply. The role of the state, if there's a role for the state, it's the same role. There are agents. It's the same role as anybody else has. They're entitled to do what we're entitled to do. After all, we're the ones who create the state, so we delegate rights to the state. So that means they can stop people from violating the principle. They can prevent people from violating the principle. They can determine when people have violated the principle. This doesn't have to be the state or the government. This could be a private court as well. As long as it's done fairly and reasonably is all I care about. And then they can punish people for violating the principle. So we need other concepts here, right? There are concepts of what we call due process. And if you're going to have a state, we don't want the state to get out of control and start doing things that are beyond the principle that we talked about. So I like things like separation of power and due process and checks and balances, because we should be skeptical of states and governments. After all, we can blame them for killing more people in the last century than anything else, right? They start wars and they kill people. So I'm not pro-state. I'm not anti-state. I don't really care as long as the state doesn't violate that rule. That's about all I have to say about the state. I don't care.
Okay, I see. And but do you believe it's possible for a state to not violate, for example, the rights of property and natural law, life, liberty, property? Do you believe it's possible for a state defined as a monopoly of justice and defense? Do you believe it's possible for that?
Well, I like the question, and I think that this is a function of how you define the state, right? How you define the government and how you define the state. These are terms that need definition. Is it possible? Could I conceive of could we get together and form an association that enforces these types of rights that doesn't violate the principle? I can conceive of such a thing, no problem. It just all depends how you define it. If you define the state as an organization that always violates the rule, well, then no. But if you define the state as a group that people come together for the purpose of protecting others from people who would violate the rule and in redressing that when people actually violate the rule, then sure, I could envision such a thing. Now, taxes, of course, which most states, or all states, I would say right now, are very fond of. Taxes violate the rule. There's no other way around this, right? If you take somebody's money without their permission, well, then this violates the rule. So if the state was intending to tax, well, then this would violate the rule in the same way that a thief who takes somebody's money out of their pocket violates the rule. So I would be against that as well. But the way I would define, and I don't really like the term state as much, because I think that this almost necessitates a violation of the rule. Although if somebody could come up with some construction that didn't violate the rule, no problem. That's all I care about, is that rule not being violated. But we do need a form of government, right? We need to have some mechanism to determine how to implement the rule, to figure out whether somebody has violated the rule. It's easy to go very quickly over the categories that I did, but the truth is we lawyers argue about all of these definitions. What exactly is force? What exactly is fraud? What exactly is coercion? What exactly is a substantial risk of harm? What should the punishment be if somebody violates the rule? These questions all need to be worked out. I don't think there's a exact right answer. In fact, in the United States, we have different definitions, state by state, of virtually all these terms. Even laws against murder, it's not just as simple as killing, don't kill somebody. It's much more complex than that. And different states have different ways to define the crime of murder. That's okay. We don't have to have a one-size-fits-all definition. As long as we have a reasonable interpretation of that rule, doesn't have to be my interpretation or your interpretation, and different communities might have different interpretations of many things about this rule. All of that's fine. I think the best we can do here in this space is to advocate for a reasonable interpretation of that rule. And what we would like to see in the Live and Let Live movement, and what we're working towards and trying to achieve, is a reasonable interpretation of that rule applied everywhere in the world. That's what our goal is. And you know, and I know, if we could get that done, we would dramatically improve the standard of living for all humans on earth, with the exception of the thugs, the people who are maybe stealing right now and living good lives off of violating that rule. But you know, even those people could do very well if they applied themselves and wanted to work hard and trade fairly with other people. So that's the kind of world that we envision, at least on the legal side of things. And so everything that I've said thus far is entirely consistent with the libertarian position, right? You haven't heard me say anything that violates the libertarian position, have you?
No, I haven't. So yeah, I understand it. So my next question to you, I think I wanted to talk to you about natural law a lot, because I think natural law is really the foundation of the argument for libertarianism. Like, there we have natural rights prior to the existence of a state, and those should be considered before positive law. You know what I mean? And I don't think most people today know about it or even consider it. So I guess my question to you is, what is your conception of natural law? And do you follow like a more religious approach? For example, the tradition by Saint Thomas Aquinas, which is a big scholar about natural law, or a more secular approach, for example, like in Murray Rothbard or Hans Hoppe, you know? So that's my question.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And I think this is one of the problems in the libertarian movement. And one of the reasons why the libertarian movement is not the dominant movement in the world. And one of the reasons why the Live and Let Live movement will ultimately be more successful, in my opinion, than the libertarian movement. Because we in the Live and Let Live movement, we don't care why you adopt the principle. Some people adopt the principle based on natural law arguments. As you know, Thomas Aquinas bases this on a religious view. God exists. God has certain thoughts about the world and edicts about the world. And this sort of blossoms into a natural law position, which one can then reach the non-aggression principle or the Live and Let Live principle. As you said, there are also secular ways to get there, but there are many other ways to get there as well. People get to the principle from social contract principles. People get to the principle from economics. People get to the principle from Ayn Rand's objectivism. People get to the principle just because they sort of feel that, you know, this makes sense. I don't know why we have to do so much work to get to the conclusion that it should be illegal to aggress against another person. This seems obvious. The argument that I like the best on this point is, duh. Is it that confusing? It should be obvious. If this is not obvious to you, then I'm interested in exploring that position. Why do you think it should be okay to aggress against another person? So we in the Live and Let Live movement explicitly say, we don't care how you get to the principle. We don't take any position on the best way to get to the principle, because there are many ways one can get to the principle. Why should we argue and fight and disagree and have bad feelings and ruffled feathers over something that doesn't matter, which is how you get to the principle? Because the reality is Most people get to the principle. If you sit down and you said to a person, do you think it should be illegal to aggress against another person? Do you think we should outlaw initiations of force and fraud and coercion and putting other people at grave risks of harm? Most people will say, of course, I agree with that. Why they agree with that is not, we don't need to resolve that question. So while I recognize a lot of people come to the principle from natural law, I don't really care because we got enough people right now who come to that principle. So we shouldn't spend any time arguing over how they get there. This is a philosophical argument, which is fine to have over a cup of coffee or something like that. But if you're wanting to bring a political movement that actually makes progress in the world, we don't need to resolve that question. In fact, I'll go further and say there are many other questions we do not need to resolve, nor should we be discussing. Like, for example, and this one might surprise you and your listeners, we don't have to argue about what's better, capitalism or socialism. Officially, I take no position on that. Both of those can be consistent with the principle, and both of those could be in violation of the principle. Let me give you an example. We'll talk about capitalism for a moment. Free market capitalism, because this is just simply competent adults exchanging goods and services, there's nothing about that that violates the principle. Therefore, I would conclude that consistent with the principle, free market capitalism is perfectly fine and should be allowed. What you might call crony capitalism, where, say, people give money to elected officials to encourage them to change laws that advantage one group or company over another. This involves coercion because there are licensing schemes and regulatory schemes and things like this. Well, this violates the principle. And for that reason alone, I'm against crony capitalism. The same can be said about socialism. If competent adults want to pool their resources together and put it in a common sort of bucket, if you will, or account, and then pay bills that they communally decide should be paid, there's nothing that violates the principle there. So what I would call voluntary socialism is perfectly consistent with both libertarianism and live and let live-ism, if you will. Coercive or involuntary socialism, where, say, we get together and decide we're going to put our money together and do this and that and pay these bills, and then we drag other people into it who do not want to be part of it. Well, okay, this violates the principle as to that person. I don't need to reach anything about economics or the Laffer curves or what raises standards of living or anything like that. I mean, we both know that free market capitalism raises standards of living, but I don't need to make that argument to my socialist friends. The only argument I need to make to them is, look, socialism's fine, but don't violate the principle. And when you drag other people into your socialism, this violates the principle. And without reaching the issue of whether socialism is better than capitalism or capitalism is better than socialism, I simply say we're against that because it violates the principle. We say the same thing about government. Big government, small government, no government, don't care. The only thing I say is, so long as the government doesn't violate the principle, that's all I care about. There's also many other questions that libertarians like to argue about, like implementation questions. What's the best way to implement some very hard questions? There are hard questions, and reasonable minds can disagree in lots of places. We don't have to resolve these things. What we say in the Live and Let Live movement is, look, if reasonable minds can disagree on the question, let's let the local community decide however they want to decide. They'll decide the question, and then they'll make that the law. And that gets us to a reasonable interpretation of the principle. And of course, if you don't like that interpretation, very easy, low transaction cost to move to the next community. And then we'll let the market decide by virtue of where people live, which rules are the best rules. And then we'll get the best rules that rise to the surface. And this is how we figure out what the best reasonable interpretations are. So what you can see here is Live and Let Live presents the entire issue differently than libertarianism, because maybe the biggest change is we don't talk about any issues. If you ask me, hey, hey, Mark, how do you feel about the drug war? How do you feel about some other issue? I'll always start with the principle first. I lead with the principle. This is a big mistake, in my opinion, libertarians have made. And I'm one of them who used to make this mistake. If you had asked me 20 years ago to do this interview, I might have led with, I think methamphetamine should be legalized, or taxes are theft, or we should abolish the government, or something like that, or I'm anti-government, or whatever. I don't say any of those things now. Some of those things are imprecise and shouldn't be said that way. What I say is, look, I'm a live and let live kind of guy. And I feel we should live and let live on the planet. What does that mean? Well, there's a live and let live principle. Here's what it means. Now let's apply it to the issue. Just like I did with capitalism and socialism, I apply it to the issue every way, because when people understand the principle, when that happens, that's when they come to our position and not before. Let me give you an example, like the marijuana issue. If people think that marijuana should be legalized because it's not really very harmful, they're not on our team. That's not our position. We might agree, we might look the same way, but we have to convince them now on many different issues. We're on the same page with one issue, but not for the same reasons. Or if they say, look, marijuana should be legal because it helps treat certain medical conditions. Okay, that's not our position. Our position is, if a competent adult is ingesting marijuana, what we care about is the only thing we ever care about. Does this violate the principle? And if it doesn't, well, then we say this should be legal conduct, and we're still free to completely try to discourage people. So if somebody was using methamphetamine and this was a competent adult, I would do my best to try to convince that person not to use methamphetamine, and I'd bring every argument I could think of. But at the end of the day, if I'm dealing with a competent adult and they're not violating the rules, say they're using it in their backyard, they're not driving a car or anything like that, well, then they're not violating the rule. So I respect their right to live their lives how they choose. If they get in their car and they drive down the road, now they're doing something that is creating a substantial risk of harm to another person or their property, then I would say you can't do that, only because that violates the rule. That's all I care about. I'm a one-trick pony. I care about if the rule is being violated. If it is, I'm always against the conduct. I say it should always be illegal. And if it's not, well, then I say it should always be legal. And that's where the libertarians stop the analysis. And that's part of the reason the libertarians haven't made progress, because they're not appealing to what is really at the heart of the disagreement between libertarians and, let's say, liberals. A lot of those liberals, or maybe socialist types, left-wing socialists, these are very good people with their hearts in the right places. So you're probably familiar with the Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Socialist in the United States. Well, what I would say to him is, I would say, Bernie, my brother, we're in agreement on a lot of things. You think that some people are born and they're less fortunate than others and they're in difficult circumstances, and I agree with that. You think we should help those people. I agree with that too. You think we should make sure they have access to good health care and good education. We're in total agreement. The only thing that we disagree on is I see these as ethics questions. They're still very important questions. I don't mean to minimize them. They're ethics questions. They're not legal questions. Bernie thinks they're legal questions. And as a legal question, he imports it into the law and then forces everybody to follow his ethical rules, ones that I agree with, I'll point out. The problem with this, if it's not obvious, is that we don't all agree on ethics, right? We have disagreements here. And so if there are only two possibilities here, because let's just say, for example, somebody else from a different moral code, say a very religious Muslim who says, look, I believe in Sharia law, and I think women should wear headscarves when they go outside. I want to put that into the law. We only have two responses that are possible here. One, no, sorry, my morality is better than your morality. Mine goes in the law and yours doesn't. This is going to bring this kind of a situation, right? We're going to always be in an endless struggle with each other to see who is going to get to import their moral views into the law. Bernie Sanders says he believes we should help those less fortunate here in the United States. I agree with that, but I might have other priorities. I send my money to Africa. I like to help people there. But he's decided that his morality should trump and should be in the law. So I don't like that approach. The other approach is we say to the Muslim, look, maybe this is a very nice moral view. We don't pass judgment on that, at least not in this space. But what we've agreed to is for the sake of a free world and to achieve peace, we all pull our morality out of the law. None of us gets to put our morality into the law. The only thing that goes into the law is what you might call the least common denominator of morality, the principle. Don't be an aggressor. That goes into the law. All reasonable people agree with that. It's the definition of being reasonable. If you don't agree with that, that means you're in favor of force and not conversation and reason. So by definition, reasonable people agree with us on this point. But we need to say something about ethics if we're going to have a peaceful world. And libertarians don't say anything about ethics, at least not as libertarians. Live and let livers say things about ethics. We have something we call the aspirational values. Yeah, values. We talk about values in the live and let live movement. The first point about this is anything I say in this space, we would oppose importing into the law. Okay, so these are ethics questions. They're different than legal questions. And so in the ethics world, we're encouraging and promoting that people be open-minded and tolerant of other people and engage in voluntary kindness and civility towards other people. We should be able to disagree in an agreeable way. We should be building high levels of trust with other human beings. We should be committed to the truth, whatever the truth is, whatever the facts are, wherever the evidence sends us, and rational inferences from that and reasonable thinking. We should be committed to these concepts. And also, the reason we're doing this is because we care about optimizing human happiness and decreasing human suffering. Yeah, I said it, and I'm proud to say it. We need to be saying these kinds of things if we're ever going to get our friends on the left to share the moral ground with us. We need to say to them, look, we agree with you on these important issues. We just treat them as ethical questions because we don't want to have an endless fight with everybody else about whose ethics go into the law, because it isn't right to impose your morality on other people. So that's how live and let live is different than libertarianism. And this would make sense if you think about libertarianism as a freedom movement and you think about live and let live as a peace movement, because freedom and peace are not the same things. Freedom can be achieved and would be achieved if we simply calibrated our laws around the principle we talked about, right? If I don't hit you over the head and you don't hit me over the head and you're in charge of your body, property, money, and time, and I'm in charge of mine, we've achieved freedom, but we haven't necessarily achieved peace, right? I mean, we could be neighbors and I could come out of my house every morning and say bad things to you. I hope you have a rotten day and this and that. And you could say horrible things to me. We could even give each other the finger and swear at each other. As long as we don't trespass, we're not violating the rule, and we should be allowed to be, if you will, jerks, as long as we don't violate the rule. And the law should protect your right to be a non-aggressive kind of a jerk. That's fine. But that doesn't get us to peace. We're more ambitious in the Live and Let Live project. We're pushing peace, which is going to require something in addition to freedom, what we talk about as the aspirational values. And we also aren't looking to a free society. We're looking to a free world and a peaceful world, because that's our community now, whether we like it or not. It's a small planet, and we travel globally and we trade globally, and there are threats globally. Look what just happened with Corona, right? You're in Brazil and I'm in the United States, and somebody in China did something that affected both of our lives. Okay, they did it, someone over there, I don't know exactly what happened, whether it was a wet market or it was some experiment or testing or that got out of a lab, but somebody did something. They created a substantial risk of harm, and it affected you in Brazil and me in Arizona. So we need to have a global community now so we can deal with these types of global threats, because as you know, we're living during a time where technology is rapidly accelerating and changing everything about it. It doesn't overstate the case to say it's going to change what it means to be human. And we need to address this. We need to agree on some fundamental rules that we call the principle, the live and let live principle. If we could get that as the predominant rule around the world, man, we could do some great things here. And we have to do this because we're facing some real threats. Smaller and smaller numbers of people can engage in greater and greater harms around the world. And we got to get a handle on this. We need to be able to call the people in China and say, hey, we think there might be a substantial threat going on over there. Let's address it and deal with it. They don't have any right to put other people at a substantial risk of harm. We got to get there soon. So failing on this mission to move towards a global peace is not an option. We have to succeed.
Yeah, I agree completely. So it seems to me like the live and let live movement is, for me at least, sort of like what should be the main libertarian argument, which is the ethical argument and not the practical one, right? Like we know through the study of Austrian economics that in a free market society, everything would work better, you know, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter much because ethics comes first, right? In hierarchy, ethics should come first. Practical issues, you know, and I think this is not something that many people realize, because when I say like, oh, well, like, I think everything should be privatized and stuff like this. And when I say this to people, the main concern they have is practical concerns, you know, how things would work. They always say, oh, no, but everyone would just kill each other. And without the state, there would be wars and society would go into chaos and stuff. And then I try to convince them exactly like this through the ethical argument, you know. And that's what I think the best way to convince people is through ethics. And so I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I think how we present what it is we're saying is very important. And I think, again, this is something that could be improved on. I think, look, people have every right to live their lives however they want. But if you want to be persuasive to greater numbers of people, there's a way to present our position in a professional, persuasive kind of a way. I don't think everybody fits the same mold, but I tell people when we have our monthly meetings with our chapters all over the world, I say, look, sometimes it's best to lead with the aspirational values. Sometimes I always start the conversation, and if we were just meeting each other, I met a guy in the gym not too long ago. We were on the same piece of equipment and we started talking, and somehow the conversation drifted into politics. And I think he was fishing to find out if I thought Biden was better or Trump was better. And I just said, look, man, I'm a live and let live kind of guy. Now, this is always met the same way. Oh, I have yet to find any different reaction than, yeah, me too. I love live and let live. And then I'll spend a few minutes on this. Yes, if we could all just live and let live, don't you think the world would be better? Of course the world would be better, blah, blah, blah. So we get all pumped up about that. And then I say, what do you think it means to live and let live? How do we define that? How do we offload that? And then they'll usually say, we'll get a conversation. And then I'll say something like, either I'll go down the legal road where I'll say, well, people shouldn't get to aggress against other people. Don't you agree with that? If you're hitting somebody over the head, you're not living live and let live, are you? And they'll always say no. And I can go down that road. Or I can say, look, we need to treat each other better. Don't you think we should have values like being open-minded? Can't we be open-minded towards each other, or tolerant? We live differently. We eat different foods. And by the way, there's a very big post-racial type of an aspect to our movement. I say openly and proudly, I don't care what color skin you have. I don't care where you were born or what language you speak or foods you eat or how you live your life. Don't care. What I care about, in fact, I like these things. I think it would be fun. I like to learn from people who are in different parts of the world and eat different foods and have different customs and songs and all that. We should celebrate this stuff. We need to get past the craziness of caring about unimportant, immutable characteristics. But so we say, okay, open-mindedness, tolerance. I go through the laundry list of things. If I'm talking to a good person, they're going to say, I love that. Okay, now I haven't even started talking about the principle yet, right? Because I've sold them on the aspirational values. But what's the importance of doing this? The wind is now at our back. If I lead with something called the non-aggression principle, they're going to say, huh? What does that mean? No, I like self-defense. And we're going to say, no, self-defense is okay. They don't understand what non-aggression means, and they're on the defensive. With live and let live, the wind is at our back. And if I've gone through the aspirational values, the fist is in the air. They're saying, yes, I love this stuff. Now it's very easy for me to sell them on that principle. And then very importantly, before I move to those issues, I'm going to get them to, as I like to say in my book, swear the blood oath that you will live your life according to the principle. And then before I move, I want to get them to agree that it should apply to all people, all groups, all corporations, and critically important, all governments. If I can get that agreement, and I can assure you I can get that agreement from the vast majority of people, they have just agreed with what you started with, the anarcho-capitalist position. They don't realize it yet, but they're 5 minutes into the conversation with me, and now they've very enthusiastically agreed to what you would call the anarcho-capitalist position. And at that point, I tell them, look, you and I are going to agree on virtually everything, or you're going to change your mind about live and let live and the principle. And they say, no, I don't think you should use force. They haven't thought it through yet. But if you don't lay that groundwork before you start talking about legalization of methamphetamine, you're going to lose them right away. And we libertarians have done an awful job explaining an absolutely elegant, a fantastic principle that we have that I believe the vast majority of people on the planet Earth would love if they simply knew what it was we were talking about. But because we do such a bad job presenting it, they have no idea. So the only thing standing between us and what we want, which is a world that is blooming with peace and freedom and higher standards of living for people and increasing happiness and decreasing suffering, is our ability to deliver that message in a way people can understand to enough people. That's all. And we've got the best opportunity we've ever had in our lifetimes. People are upset all over the planet right now. People aren't happy with how their governments have done things for the most part. People in the United States, the Republicans are cranky, the Democrats are cranky. It's a great time to bring something new and say, hey, let's try something new. How about live and let live for a change? How about we talk about being civilized with each other and lead with those values a little? And so for people listening to this who are interested in not just sitting on the sidelines, but getting involved, this movement is not yet kicked off. We're kicking this thing off. And by the way, I want to just say, this is a very serious effort. This isn't something we're doing part-time. There are very committed people all over the world. We have at least 10 countries in Africa right now. We have many, many different countries in Europe. We have Australia, and we just started a chapter in South America, in Colombia. And so this is growing. We intend to kick it off in March of 2023. So I'm encouraging people listening to this who are saying, yes, I love this. Go to liveandletlive.org, shoot me an email, at least join the movement at a bare minimum. Put your name and email in there and be part of this movement so we can stand up and say millions of people agree with us, so we can get attention, right, on what we're saying. But I would encourage people now, if you're a good communicator and you think you can present this in a nice professional way, start a chapter. We don't have a chapter in Brazil, so I'm going to lean on you a little bit and say, hey, start a chapter over there. This is not a big commitment. All we need is you sign a form that says, I want to start a chapter. We talk a little bit about how we present things in Live and Let Live. So we're not arguing about things that divide people, but we're presenting it just like I've presented it. And then commit to a once a month meeting. No big deal. It can be virtual. We'll appear. We have lots of people in the movement who'd be happy to run it for you. Put some people together once a month. Let's have a meeting. And then also the only other thing we ask of the chapter leaders is come to our monthly meeting, meet the other chapter leaders around the world. This has turned into a wonderful, even social experience. I got friends in many different countries now, every one of them committed to the global peace movement, Live and Let Live. We blast off with the shaka at the end. We say peace and everybody's blasting this Hawaiian shaka. And it's a wonderful, inspiring, exciting kind of a movement. So yeah, we need chapters all over the world. We're planning a big kickoff on a conference, which might look more like a workshop actually, to make sure we're all on the same page. And we're also planning to kick off what you might call sort of an informal global political party. So people would run for office as a live and let live, whatever the party is in Brazil. That's the whatever party you want to run. I don't care. You're a live and let live, whatever. And that way, when the world takes note and says, hey, there are people in Brazil running as live and let live candidates, and in the United States and in France and in Australia, what is this live and let live thing? That's when we're going to win the day, because now they'll come to the website, and we're working very hard. We're going to have a world-class website that explains this in the simplest, easy to understand, yet non-compromising on that principle. There is nothing that I say or that is in the Live and Let Live movement that the most hardcore anarcho-capitalist could disagree with, period. Yeah. It's very pure in terms of our philosophy, but it's presented in a very different, more palatable, more friendly, welcoming, inclusive kind of a way. And when you add the aspirational values to what we're saying, it puts the finishing touches on the proper movement, in my opinion, to get to peace.
Great. That sounds great. So I don't want to take much more of your time. So can I ask you one last question, and then
sure.
We can, okay.
Whatever you like.
So by the way, I am a law student here in Brazil. So
oh, good. Excellent.
I would just like to ask you something related to this, which is, what is your advice for libertarian law students like me for dealing with a system that is so closely tied to the state, which is the justice system, the law, which is nowadays, unfortunately, very tied to the state and bureaucracy, especially here in Brazil. I mean, there's so much bureaucracy involved, and it makes things really, I guess, difficult for some people that value liberty and natural rights. And so I guess, what is your advice for people like me who are,
well, first off, I'm very pro law school, and I'm generally very pro lawyer, because the libertarian movement is all about changing the law. That's what it's about. The Live and Let Live movement is about that, plus aspirational values. But we got to get the law changed. This is absolutely critical. So we want lawyers in this movement. And what I would do is focus on the principle. I don't know what area of law you're going to go into, but if it's criminal, what does that look like? Look, most of the crimes in the criminal justice system, all of the victim crimes violate the principle. Murder, rape, robbery, burglary, theft, assault, these all violate the principle. So we should take the position, these are proper crimes. I don't care who's enforcing them. It's irrelevant to me who's enforcing them. You have every right to enforce this yourself. Your neighbor can enforce this. The local sheriff can enforce it. The government police can enforce it. Global police could enforce it. Aliens could enforce it. Don't care. As long as it's being reasonably and fairly enforced is what I care about. So I would always make my arguments around the principle. So what does this look like in the justice system, the criminal justice system? Victimless crimes should be out. We should get rid of those. Why? Because they don't violate the principle. So crimes against prostitution, all drug crimes, whether they're manufacture, whether they're sales, whether they're transportation, whether they're use, they don't violate the principle. Now, unless, of course, you're selling to a minor, that's different, right? Because minors are in a different category than our competent adults. Everything I'm talking about is a competent adult. But if that principle is not violated, as a lawyer, you should stand up and say, Judge, this shouldn't even be a crime. I say it in court all the time. Now, I don't know what the issues are there in Brazil, but if there's corruption and dishonesty, well, then this violates the rule and we should be against that. What we want is a nice, clean, fairly run criminal justice system. We need that. Whether this is run by the government, the local community, a homeowners association, a private protection agency, I don't really care. In fact, different places might do it differently. We don't need to get into this fight. What we need to do is communicate the importance of calibrating the law around that principle. That is our primary goal, maybe our only goal in this space of the law. And then we need to talk to the good people of the world and inspire them to really believe and get into the aspirational values. We should be voluntarily kind towards other people and help other people because it's the right thing to do. And we shouldn't be shy about saying that. We need to say that. If we're going to get to peace, we need something beyond just a justice system that runs properly. So yeah, I'm glad you're going to law school. I think it's great. We need more live and let live lawyers out there. Maybe, I don't know, start a live and let live club at the law school. Start a live and let live section of the bar association. Be a live and let live attorney. Start a live and let live chapter and run it. Lawyers are particularly well suited to understand this stuff because it's what we study all the time. When I say, look, it's a violation of the rule to engage in a substantial risk of harm to another person or their property, this is teed up for lawyers to discuss, right? Sometimes other non-lawyers may not understand all this stuff. A tiny little risk, they might say, well, this violates the rule. No, there's certain things you sort of consent to by living in the world, right? Then there are out of the extraordinary risks. That's what we're talking about, those kinds of things. By the way, one other little difference in how we interpret the principle in the live and let live movement, this is a little different than libertarianism. We take the position in live and let live, or at least I take the position in live and let live, that it also violates the principle to breach a contract or to engage in a tort, a negligent harm towards another person, a car accident or something. And because this is a different kind, this is what we call a less serious violation of the rule. That's why we treat these as civil matters, right? A breach of contract is a civil matter, but it's still okay to say, hey, wait a second, you breached and you owe this guy damages and we're going to undo that. Or you crashed your car into somebody else. Yes, it was an accident, but you still violated the live and let live rule. No, you're not going to jail, but yes, you got to pay damages to this person because you injured them. And that violates the live and let live principle. This gives us a more complete justice system, a civil justice system, as well as a criminal justice system. We need to explain why we're going to redress that harm, but we're not putting people in jail or prison on these types of things because it's a less serious violation, but it's still a violation nonetheless.
Absolutely. So, thank you. I think we already have been for 50 minutes, about 50 minutes. So I really don't want to take much more of your time.
It's been a pleasure being on your show, and I thank you for the opportunity. And hopefully, I've inspired you to want to get more involved. Maybe start a chapter. Would love to have a chapter in Brazil. You'd be the guy running it over there, and your group would be the pioneers. And it seems like you'd be a great person to bring this to Brazil. And also, it'd be wonderful to link you up with our community around the world, and of people who are now just calling themselves live and let livers. Real easy.
Oh, thank you. If you can send me more information about this through email, I would appreciate it. And
okay, we'll talk after the show.
All right. So thank you so much for being here, and it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
I would just encourage people to go to liveandletlive.org. Check out Live and Let Live. If you like what you see, join the movement, send it around on your social media. We got a big project ahead of us. We're trying to change the world. Do your part to help out change this world. Get involved. I really want to encourage people, especially the ones listening to this show. These people understand this stuff. We got to reach out to the non-libertarians, right? Our pitch needs to go to them. But as to the libertarians who understand this stuff right now, get involved, help out the effort. It's the right thing to do. And thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
And I'll blast you with the live and let live, right?
Thank you.
The Hawaiian shaka.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Okay, brother.